Well, every week we're getting a better and better slideshow. Not that anyone is any more better than the other one, but great to see you all this morning. Wasn't that a wonderful little slideshow? I think it's one of our successes for our little program that we've had going for the last 10 or 11 weeks, that we're all able to produce slideshows. And I think it's a wonderful. It makes it very good for us going forward that anyone can make up a slideshow, and we're learning more and more as we go along. I'm very pleased and very thankful that you are all participating. I know it can't be easy. I know you got a huge amount of homework to do the last time round. I apologise utterly. I promise I will never do that again. But we do need to be moving along because we've only a few more of these live streams to go, and I would like to get to the triangle of exposure and get all of that into your head and understand what it's about, because that is life-changing. That is the eureka moment where everything that you've learned and all the effort that you put in up to this will absolutely make utter sense, and it will always stand to you. If you are using a phone, the stage we are at now, there's not as much of the settings that you can do as those who have cameras can actually use. Those who have compact cameras also have all of these facilities on it. If you are struggling to understand and do some of the stuff that we're doing because you're only operating from a camera, from a phone, at least stay with us and have a listen to what is being said and what is being done, because it will give you an appreciation for when you watch an exhibition or you see a photograph, what's actually gone into it and the technical aspects that are involved with it. And you might not have realized it, but you have learned a huge amount, and you've moved a huge amount in understanding what all the different settings are for on your camera. And there is an awful lot of them there that you may not necessarily ever use or ever need again. But it is sorting out the men from the boys, or the girls from the women or ladies, whichever you want to say. And it is very good that you have achieved this, and you've learned quite an amount. If you just look back, the life-changing experiences that you've had over the last periods of time, the first one that I've always said to people is very important is understanding focus lock. That first half the press of your shutter, that is focus lock. On a camera or on a phone or on a laptop, it's when you put your finger on the spot that you want to have sharp or you want to have exposed correctly, but that's focus lock. And you've all learned that, and that is really worthwhile. But knowing about it is one thing, but there's now, as we've gone further, you understand the other implications that are involved with that focus lock. Then we went on to do exposure compensation, and exposure compensations lets you make an adjustment to your photograph if it doesn't appear correct on the screen when you look at it. That's what it does. Remember, always go back to the default position of 0. It doesn't automatically go back. You have to set it back. Once you move it, you then have to bring it back each time yourself, right? So that was exposure lock. Then we went on to understand what ISO was and where it got set on your camera. It related to what film used to be. We used to buy different rolls of film, whereas now we have a load of different film speeds all in our camera at the one stage. Two main settings. One is auto, and the other one is where you decide to set it yourself. Then we got where we are now into a confusing area of focus modes and exposure modes. They almost look the same, they're almost set in the same place, but they've got two completely different aspects to them. Focus modes is how the automatic of the camera calculates the focus, and the exposure modes is how it works out the exposure that's needed. Two separate things, first cousins of one, are very, very easy to get the two of them confused and the implications that are involved in it. And we have also moved on to shutter, which we will be talking about later on today. Now, some may say you only have a compact camera and you don't have some of these settings. You do. They're called presets. Right, and the one that says landscape is working on the aperture part. The one that says sports is putting priority to the shutter speed, right? So that's what they are. I've always said to people that if all else fails, you can use them, but to understand what's going on is a far, far better way of understanding it. The other thing that I keep on saying to you, I would hope now at this stage you are only using automatic. If you've just started into photography, you use automatic. But after you understand what automatic is about, you move into program. But program has implications in it, right? And one of the implications is that you have to know what you're setting, because it can get you into trouble if you've got the wrong setting in it. So it's very, very important, as I say, to have the right setting. Otherwise you'll be led astray, but the results will be far, far superior. When you get further up along the line, you only ever use the program when you have your camera in your bag, but once you take it out and once you start taking photographs, you make the decision then whether it's going to be aperture priority or shutter priority. And once you get used to using either one of these two and the implications that are involved with it, you will never turn back. You will always be using either one of them. Program is very handy if you want to work quick and you're unsure and things are changing a lot. But remember, you've got other controls as to the type of metering you're using and shutter speeds, and all these things get thrown up in the air all at the one time. And please stay with us to the very end, and don't give up at this stage, because you're knocking on the door of absolute success, of understanding where all of these settings come in, one in relation to the other. So we're going through each one of them slowly, one by one. So that's the position that we're at present, and that's where we have got ourselves to. And I think you should all deserve a great vote of thanks in what you have done, because you've achieved quite an amount. So let's move on a little bit further, and let's have a look at the homework that came in. So as I say, there was two pieces of stuff coming in. There was metering and there was shutter. So let's go to the metering first, right? And when we were talking last week, as a quick refresh, we were talking about metering. This is the exposure, right? And it was the pattern, center weighted, multi, or spot. And these were the sort of symbols that would be kind of used in it. And that's what we were talking about. We were saying that on the camera, it's metering. This is for exposure. So you've got the one here, the metering mode is called multi. Different cameras, different names. All right. Then we had pattern, which gives an overall view, tries to get detail in the highlights and detail in the shadow. Right, nothing to do with focus, just to do with exposure. Get the exposure right, and the focus is happening in a different part of the automatic at the same time in the background, right? So this is just pattern for exposure, so it's doing an overall view of it. The next one, and that's what that was, normal pattern, just to say what it was. This next one was center weighted, and it was operating in the center, and you have a look at it. Can't see very much difference between the two of them, and most people will say that. So you can, whichever one you prefer is the one you can work with and stay with, which you'll be using most of the time. Probably the multi is probably the best one, because it gives it around the outside, whereas the center is just for the ones that's most the center part of the image, is giving a better exposure in here. Put more emphasis on that one. And that was a center weighted, and I was just saying what it was. Spot is the other really, really useful one to have. You won't use it all of the time, but when you do use it, it is a godsend, and it is really worth learning about and knowing about, especially for the advanced photographer, especially in certain sorts of situations where spot metering for the exposure works out very, very well. So that's what that was. It will always show on the camera what spot it's picking. In this case, it picked that spot up there. Excuse me, you have to bring that to the spot you want the exposure to be red, then by half depressing we'll hold that exposure for you. Or if you've got that little dot in line with the spot. Some cameras you can move it around with your finger if they're touchscreen. Others you have to use. It's not the focus lock, it's exposure lock, but it's the same button. It's the same idea that works on quite a few of them, on cameras. And then when you go for spot, this is for spot metering, and you have to decide where, and we decided up here in the sky, which is bright, got the exposure right up here in this sort of an area here, with the highlights here, okay, but totally no detail in the shadows, right? That's what you expect, okay? And then that's what that was, and then that was the other one going down here into the shadow, because you want to take a photograph that the shadows are more important than the highlights. So you've gone down here, put the little square down here, taking the photograph. Now you've got correct exposure here, and it's trying to give detail into the shadows, but it's sacrificed all the highlights, right? So that would, as I say, that would be used if you were photographing a person who was backlit. That would be a very good way of taking the exposure off their face. Okay, and that's what that was about. Okay, that was for last week, and the the competition. Okay, let's have a look at what came in. Okay, if you see, I'm not giving out to Bonnie, but she put 1, 2, 2, 1. That's one I put in 1, 2, and 3 in front of her images when she's putting in her file name, which is fine once nobody else does it. If somebody else does it, I run into trouble. So you can see the reason why if we put the name first, it holds all that person's stuff in the one spot, right? It was just, you know, it seems logical way of doing it to put 1, 2, 3, but if you put it at the far side of it, it works out better for us. To work with when it goes in here. Not the end of the world. I was able to sort it out, and if it was more than one, I'd be able to sort it out as well. Okay, so here comes Bonnie stuff. Okay, and pattern, that is absolutely perfect. I'll put up file info here as well, so you can see what's going on. Okay, so she has a 2,000th of a second at f8. So that means that's a fairly bright day. Right, you can tell that by the exposure. She's using 400 ISO. She hasn't, I presume she set that herself and not go with what the auto was, or maybe auto produced that. You just wouldn't know here at this stage which it was. Okay, so this is the road. It's done with pattern. Writing pattern in here is brilliant, because then when you look back at it yourself, you can see it. But it looks a little bit on the dark side, or something a little bit strange about it. I couldn't quite fathom. So I went to the file, right clicked and went down to the properties, exposure minus -1.7. It's underexposed by nearly 1 3/4 stops, right? So that was the exposure compensation, wasn't set back at 0, and no matter how good your metering system is in your camera, it will have, you know, it can only do its best, and we're fighting against that exposure compensation that was put into it. As I always say, sense bought is much better than sense taught, and there's an example of it. And it happens because that's what happens when you're in program Aperture Priority or Shutter Priority, whichever you are working with in this occasion. So that's one of the disadvantages, whereas automatic would never cause that problem for you. It wouldn't give you that option. And if it did, it would always bring you back to 0 before you went on to your next shot. Whereas you move into program, you have to remember to 0 at each end. This is perfect. Not much difference overall. Still, the effect of what we're trying to achieve with the different metering systems has been totally achieved in this exercise. And the center way to put it in makes it work absolutely perfect as well. Okay, this one is spot. Okay, now my dilemma here is, which is the spot? What was the spot it was taken on, right? And a really handy place that we used to use in the past when we were using handheld light meters. We're looking for grey. A grey is where is a neutral spot. We would also often take a light reading off the road. or off the grey of the road in this case, to get our shutter speed. So that's probably where it's taken. But the idea of spot is that you know where it is. So in this case, you could say, well, I want detail in the highlights or in the shadows. This type of a shot, spot metering is of no real great advantage to you, because unless you were to use this to get detail into the sky by taking it off the sky and make this darker, or vice versa. I don't think she didn't do that. She took the spot probably off the ground. But the exercise of understanding where the spot is has been achieved, and that's all this exercise was about. These other things that I am saying are not criticisms. They are meant for where we are going in the next two lectures that we will be doing. We will be talking about this again, and instead of referring back to using this as an example, you say, oh yeah, we're talking about spot when we were there. Okay, these ones were sent in by Etna, and on this one she has center weighted, which means this area in here. Fine, perfect. You would expect it to be average good, and it is. And the next one, she comes along, and Etna always makes me look good, you know, always. And here she's done it again. She's found this little bit of a piece of, probably off her instructions or somewhere, and she has done a screen grab of it, and she's put it in with the homework. And that gives everybody who's watching now a very good idea as to what's meant by it. She also has it sitting with her sample photographs to go with what this was all about. So when she comes back later on, I would suggest you put a folder where you've all these tests done, and put them all into one folder. And if you, a couple of weeks' time, remember doing something about metering, now what was it? You can go back here, and the instructions are here as well as to what was meant by it. You could also do a screen grab of this tutorial that we're doing, this live stream, and put it in there as well as a screenshot, okay? And we will do screenshots, how to do that as well for people who don't know how to do screenshots. Very, very screen grabs, very, very easy to do, and this is perfect. Thank you, Etna, making me look good again. And this is then she multimetering, same as center weighted, but goes much more further out to the side and takes more of the sides of the photographs into. That's probably average best one. I think you'll be all using that 99% of the times. But it's nice to know what the other ones are and what they do. And then the next one, she went to spot metering, and she picked the green tree to take the spot metering off. Okay, to get it right. Okay, so that's what it did. And then the next one she went for, she says the red tree, but because it's more in shade, I think something might have gone a little bit astray there somewhere. I don't know exactly what happened because it's all, because that's darker. Oh yes, sorry, it is right, because it is the darker areas. You're getting shadow detail, which you're getting up here in the umbrella, which would normally have been dark. Sorry, Etna, beg for forgiveness. And then this one, she was using the sky. She's not there, no, not with us yet. Okay, maybe she's incognito. Okay, she can maybe be watching it later. Okay, so this one, spot metering. Okay, using the sky, and to get the sky right. Okay, perfect. We all understand what's involved. And this comes from Gary. Center weighted metering. This is the bit in here. It does exactly what it says on the can, and it is exactly. Multimetering, yes, that's fine as well. Not much in the difference. Spot meter is focused, located on the sea. Focus isn't the word positioned on. Focus, I know what you mean, but that might confuse you with the focusing mode, right? And I know that's not what you mean. You're using the metering mode. It's always saying that it's on the sea, so you're getting detail in the sea. That's absolutely perfect. Got the idea. Spot metering on the sky. Should be giving more detail into the sea. Spot metering focus on the located on the sea. And this is focused on the sky, camera alarm activated. So that probably means that it was flashing at him. Okay. No, would have expected to see more detail if the spot had been on the sky. I would have expected to see that more correctly exposed, and this being darker. I don't know. Maybe I've misinterpreted something here. These ones were put in by Irene. A multiple exposure. All right. Our multimetering gives it overall. Center weighted, which is very, very similar. Spot, I don't know. Did she say where she put the spot? I don't know where the spot was, but at least the idea was understood as to what she meant. Right, and then she moved. This is Mary. Okay. This is center weighted. This is to get the center area here. As you would expect, it works very well in that type of a subject because of shadow detail, highlight detail. There is sky. Sky is burnt out, but it is trying to compromise. It's only, it is trying to compromise, and it's got it. The next one is very, very similar. The pattern will probably give us more detail up here compared to the center weight. It won't give us as much brightness up there. It's marginal. You won't be looking awful close to see that difference. Spot metering. Does she say where? No, she doesn't say where she's put the spot metering. But the idea of the exercise was to use spot metering. But you can see the implications of where you put the spot metering. Okay. Now, this one is center weighted. Yeah, makes absolute sense. A pattern. Makes sense. Spot metering. Where's the spot metering put on? We don't know where the spot metering is put. A spot, well, obviously she's moved. Oh, maybe I misunderstood. The spot is, oh no, spot is on the sky, and spot is on the sky. Or maybe reading from those two spots. Okay, and I had a look at this because I was wondering what was gone a bit astray. Exposure compensation again is 1 1/3 stops under. So that was what was throwing our readings on these ones, because it wasn't set back to 0. But that doesn't affect what the exercise was about, was using spot and where the spot was being used. I know Mary is screaming at the screen, says, I know what I did there, and he's not understanding what I'm doing. So it needs a little bit more, you get the idea how spot really changes. So put the spot on the sky. Oh, I know now. Put the spot on the sky, this went dark. Put the spot on the here, and this went bright. You got detail here. Sorry, Mary, knew you get it perfect. Okay, and that was unfortunate, but that's just one that snaked up in the background to get the better of you, all right? So you all did very well there. If you've noticed, these are all your stuff. Now I have downsized all the images to smaller sizes than what you sent it in to me at. All right, when you were sending them in, these are sent them in. Look at how much bigger the file sizes are. I brought it smaller so when I was showing it here on the live stream that it wouldn't be taking up too much memory in the system, so that it wouldn't be crashing on me. So I did that. So I'm going to later on, hopefully if we have time, I'm going to explain to you how to downsize, because downsize and making images smaller has become important when we're putting stuff in for the challenge. People were realizing that their stuff wasn't going in. I thought in my innocence that 10 megabytes would be plenty. But look at this one here from Bonnie's, is 9.5. Right, so that's going awful close. That would just about get through on the system, and if it was any way above that, it wouldn't. And a couple of people had difficulty getting their images in, and we had to downsize it. I'm very thankful that it happened, because it's a learning curve of us to try to learn how that system works. And when things go wrong, I really like to hear about them and know about them, because we can correct them and we can put them right. Because you never know how something is going to handle until you actually get into action and have a look at what is going on. Now, you had an awful lot of hard work to do over the weekend, I know, and the other piece of homework you had was Shutter. Okay, and with Shutter, well, we'll refresh very quickly on what we were talking about in Shutter. The shutter speed influences the amount of movement that appears in the photo. It's all to do with movement. Right, and to do Shutter, we were going into Shutter priority. TV or S is called. You select the shutter speed and the camera will suit the aperture to match. You can also set the ISO if you want to, or you can set the ISO to automatic. You have to have that in your system. So, they're one of the things to be put into consideration when you're using a shutter priority. And once you understand this and know this, it's no great problem. Once you know what's going on. If you don't and it gets caught in the background, it can catch you out. Okay. So the next one was 1,000, something that's moving, shot at 1,250th of a second. Even though it is moving, it will appear stopped. And then as the speed gets longer, it's getting more and more blurred, right? Until it gets completely blurred there at the end. Okay? So, now, I want to... Bonnie has fallen into a little trap, all right? And she's not the only one who fell into this little trap. And this is very important to know when this happens, right? She shot this at 125th of a second, which is a slow shutter speed. She couldn't really get any slower than this, technically, with her camera. Oh, she might be able to. Oh, she might have been able to. Sorry, I take that back. And the exercise was to use the shutter speed, right, to get the flag, because it's a slow shutter speed, to have a little bit of movement in it. Now, 125th of a second is fast enough to be able to handhold to stop you shaking the camera. So there's no shake here, right? To get, movement in that would have to be moving very, very fast. You are getting it, right? Okay. Shot on a very bright day. Okay. And if you look here, she has shot it at 125th of a second at f8.9. Okay. Now, I don't know what she was using. Is she using program or... she's using shutter priority. So she has control over her shutter. So at 125 it gave. So why? No, I take back what I'm saying. But my dilemma is, you see that one seems to be, the exposure seems to be much brighter. And you come into the next one and it looks more like what it would be at 200 of a second at f8.9. Is 8.9 the smallest aperture that you have on your camera? Possibly. Right, that's where the challenge is. Look, her camera won't go any smaller than 8.9. So when you go back here, she's still at 8.9. She wasn't able to go any smaller. She wasn't. So that's why that's overexposed, right? And like that as well. They are both set at 400 ISO. So when you get back to this one, in order for that to be correctly exposed, that would have to drop to 200 ISO. Okay, so obviously it wasn't set to automatic. She did set herself. So that's good. You realize that it's given trouble. Also, if you had looked at your camera, it will be giving you an indication to say no can do, right? And because you were so organized in getting the shutter speed, you didn't see no can do, because that ISO needs to be brought lower in order to do it. When we get to the triangle of exposure, this will become a lot more obvious. But on this occasion, and you're not the only one who had this problem, and I knew this was going to happen to people, right? So you can blame me for leaving you in this trap. And I think if you get trapped in one of these ones, you can understand what is going on. See how that one is correctly exposed. The one under it, the camera isn't able to, the automatic system when the camera isn't able to get low enough for it. You could have used the lower ISO, or you often hear us talking about neutral density filters. That's an occasion for neutral density filters to get the blur, as in the water type shots. Or take it on a duller day. This was taken on a duller day, or later in the evening you would get down there as well. And now everything is going tickety-boo, right? Because each time now that 8.9 is able to cope with it there. You see, that hasn't changed. For those three exposures, it's been 8.9 because the camera doesn't go any lower. Okay. And you see how these exposures, as far as exposure is concerned, is much better. But the exercise was to do with the blur, but you can't get the blur. Is no good if you haven't got the exposure correct as well. So I think this is a really, if Bonnie understands what I am saying, this is a really life-changing experience, because this really explains what is actually going on with the exposure on these occasions. Okay, and then obviously when you get up to really fast speeds, it really catches it. Look, and it was well seen to see the flag in a position like that to be able to catch it. Okay, if it had been like that and blown out, if you in the slower shutter speeds, it had been all blurred, as you would expect, right? Okay, absolutely stops it. Okay, and she can really go to fast shutter speeds, right? But you have to be careful as you come to fast shutter speeds that you don't run out of aperture. All right, or did she run out of aperture? Let's go back and see. 4.9 on that one, right? That's okay. This one was 3.5. That might be your full aperture on your cameras. That might be the other extreme of which you can do it with the settings. These were more, I think, or Mary. I can't remember who these were. I haven't got the name up here. Anyway, we got the idea. The brush that would stop the action. Got the idea. Has the same thing. It's a similar thing happening here, right? What's our maximum? We're out 1,000. Aperture here is 3.5. Aperture here 4. Oh, that's working okay. That's working okay. And as it comes up, as the speed gets faster, 180th is a slow shutter speed at f6.3. I'm wondering, is that overexposed? Because, it's ran out, the ISO is quite high. So in order to get that to correctly expose, you have to go down. Now, Eileen, I'm really impressed with Eileen. Very, 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 very interesting. She got the why didn't I think of running water in a tap running? Okay, this was a perfect idea to use on this exercise. Now, let's have a look at what she's using. 1/5 of a second, which is very, very long, right, in exposure. She's using f22, which on her camera, I would be 99% sure is the smallest little aperture that she can use. And she's using the lowest ISO that she could possibly use, 100. So everything is with her in order to get this shutter speed to work, right, and to give the correct exposure. And as you can see, the water is all a blur, right? Okay. I would assume, I would hope that maybe not, I don't know, this would have had to have been shot on a tripod for it to be successful. Otherwise, you'll see shake up here in the top of the hose and in the bucket here, because Eileen is good, but to be able to hold 1/5 of a second without shaking is no easy task. But it's got everything to do with getting the speed and getting the milky look in the water. That could be the same effect as what you'd be getting was a waterfall. Exactly the same. And you have actually got the perfect way of doing it, because your camera has all these things. To go even slower than this, you'd have to take it on a duller day or use neutral density. I don't think you've got anything lower than 100 ISO. So, or maybe it was set on auto and a little nerd took care of it, or maybe Eileen took care of it herself. So that's very, very good. But I don't know if you had it on the tripod. It would need to be. Now this one, look at how sharp that is. Okay, it's gone to a 20th of a second now at f18. All right. So was it on a tripod or something went wrong, or does this see how sharp all that is? That previous one should be equally sharp. So which moved? Or when you press the shutter, if it was on the tripod, did it fly? And if that was the way you're doing those really long exposures, use delayed action for 1 second or whatever, so the camera fires without you touching it. But that's now sharp. That's where you want to see the last one. And all of these here are making sense. And what has she done here? She's 1/50th of a second. These are, it's also getting a little bit of milkiness. Let's see how fast she gets up to 160th of a second. Whoops. That's as far as she went, right up to 160th, right? Now, it is still a little bit on the milky side. If you were able to get up to 1,000th of a second, which your camera will well do, and but the ISO then will have to be changed, I would say, because you won't have enough light in the system to be able to do it. So yes, at the bottom range of this of it, you got it absolutely perfect, but only went to 160. But to get really fast ones,
not on a tripod.
Handheld, yeah, very good, Eileen, very, very good. Yeah, you're really getting to the idea as to what it's all about, and you have a wonderful camera that has all these settings on it, and this is where you can really use it to your advantage and to be able to use it. If you were to reshoot that for experimental purposes again, because it's a great idea, shoot it as a vertical photograph, just including the side of the watering can here. Pretend it's going into the watering can, right? And then you won't get caught for a hose band. And as it is coming down, and just show that little bit there and let it fill the whole shot with the water movement, right? And that will be able to see the milkiness look of it or whatever. If it was against a black background, you put a piece of black cardboard or something in there at the back, you'll see that coming out even better. And especially if it's side light with the lighting coming in. I know it's only a tap with water coming out of it, but these principles will apply all the way through photography, you know. Now, this is Gary. Gary, you fell into the same trap. Same trap for Gary, right? He is, thanks for putting in these ones here. It makes it really, really easy, right? That's grossly overexposed, and you can see what has happened. 1/50th of a second at f22. Look at the ISO that he's using, 25,600, right? That is very, very sensitive. It's a very bright day. It's a very long exposure, and the camera cannot close down below f20-25, right? f22 is probably most camera, but 25 is what here camera is. It wasn't able to do it. It was out of range. You could have only got, that shot would have only have worked.
Gary, I've seen that ISO
was set
too high this morning, and we set it before
the live stream. Just testing you, of course, Gary. No, you're making it so that everybody else can realise. You're giving me material to work with. You're trying to make me look good like Edna. All right? You can become the star student and teacher's pet by doing that. That's no problem. Yes, Gary, yeah. And you see, but I'm also explaining this to everybody else who's looking in to see. We learn by our own mistakes and by other people's mistakes. And it's not really a mistake. Or you'd be lying in bed and you think, say, why did that happen? All right. Now that's an awful lot better, isn't it? Still, the ISO is very, very high. All right. The shutter speed is only 125th view. f25 is your smallest aperture, right? It cannot close down any more than that, right? The only way you can get less light to go into your camera is by changing your ISO or putting a neutral density filter in front of your camera, all right? So that's what's happened there. But the exercise was to try the 125th of a second, and yes, you can see the spokes are 125th of a second, right? The idea. Now you're starting to get there a little bit better, right? Because 800 of a second at f18, the camera can cope with that at that huge ISO. But if you look in at the actual image, see the noise, the grain is starting to show here. Now it's more than acceptable, you're not going to see it, but that's because you're working with such a high ISO, and 800 of a second pretty well stops the spokes. The next one definitely stops the spokes, right? And your camera is well able to work. It's gone to f9 at this stage, but remember your camera will come down to f2.8 or whatever, so you know there's other options there for you. And that one is, again, is 1/800th of a second at 6.3. And then at the end, you're making it look good again because you proved the speed that your spokes were going at, right? You're looking for extra brownie points. And fair to you, that sort of thing really, really helps because it explains to people the actual speed that was involved. Well done, Gary. You've got the idea. Now these are put in by Irene, and she's gone for the milky look, right? On the underwater a little. Now if what you're using the shutter speed here is it's the water. Like I was saying to Irene, if you had zoomed in on the watery bit, you would see the effect of the movement because the movement is in it. And that's 1,300 of a second. 1,250, it's saying here, yeah, that can happen at times. It's f3.7, which means your camera is fully opened and you've used ISO. I would say your camera is fully open, with full aperture at that stage. It's a 27mm zoom on it, which is pretty wide angle, so you could have zoomed in a little bit tighter on that because you would see the bit that we were talking about. And that should stop the water, right? 800 should stop it less, and this is 500. 500 should stop it even less. 250. See what's happened to you there. 250 at f3.8. 150 at 3.8. Your camera ran out of scope. Right, the same as it happened to other people. Now, I'm not blaming anybody for this. I left that trap there for you all to fall into. And you have a lot of you have fallen into that trap. There'll be a symbol coming up on your camera warning you about it, right? And this is a well-learned exercise, well worth learning. You can change your ISO here. If you had brought that down to 400 or 200, you would have got away with that. Now, what you're really trying to achieve to get movement is the slower speeds, the one like what Eileen had down at 1/5 of a second. Now, you would never be able to handhold 1/5 of a second, and you'd want to go out in the dark and at dusk to be able to get 500 of a second. But you see the point. I'm explaining to you where you will actually get it to work. It's not a criticism about the actual photograph. It's allowing us to explain these sort of things. And see the way the exposure has gone. Now these ones were put up by Mary, and she's put up here. It's great when it's up here for myself and for yourselves, because you can put this into a folder and you can always refer back to it and know what it was. You are using 100 ISO because she has it written down there. Obviously, I assume that Mary set that. You could have also, maybe it said you were using shutter priority in this one as well for yourself. So when you go back, you can see it only for yourselves. All right, and she's got it up 125th of a second, and that's the speed that one is shot at. This is at 200. I presume she went over and shook the blouse. Oh yes, yeah, the blouse is getting shook a little bit. That is to try and stop the action and the movement of it. 5.6 at 800. Yes, 800. Oh, she's changed the ISO here, has she? No, she left it at 800 all the way through, which you could do. Right, getting the away all the way down 3.5, all going to the end without any difficulty, right? So that's all got the idea. It's the whole idea is to get something. It's blowing in the breeze, but you really want the long shutter speeds to see a huge amount of blur, all right? And you don't want to have too much light around. If you want to have blurry, you want to have dull lighting conditions. If you want to stop action, Etna?
So you can change the ISO within the shutter speed.
Shutter priority
mode to be appropriate
to the ISO. Yes, you can. You have control. When you are using aperture and shutter priority, you've control over a huge amount of stuff. The automatic takes care of the bits that you don't make a decision on. When you're using automatic, the NUR does everything. When you're using program, it allows you have a control over some of the things, but not all of it. Manual lets you have control over absolutely everything, but doesn't. You have to read the readings and take your own interpretations from it. So that's why I haven't gone near manual, but manual is the ultimate one for control, but you really have to know what's going on. Yes, Etna, that can be done. Now these ones are put up by Etna. And this is 1/2000 of a second at 4.8, and that is to stop the action, and the action has been stopped.
So the shutter speed.
To do the shutter speed. So you can change the ISO within the shutter priority mode, yes, to be appropriate to the ISO, yes. to the shutter speed. Yes, you can change it around to your heart's content, or you can leave it at auto. You can leave the ISO at auto and let the nerds take care of it, or you can make the executive decision yourself. And how would you make that executive decision? You would make that executive decision on the exercise that we did on ISO, where you went through them and you looked and you said, oh, sure, I can't tell any difference between 400 and 800 and 1600. Sure, I can shoot all my images at 800. I don't have to worry about it. You leave it set at 800 unless you need to change. Or if you're not sure of where you're going to be, you can leave it in the auto position. It's one of those things you have to make a decision on, and the more you know, the more implications and the more questions you're going to say yes, but. Now, why has that gone so dark? That has gone so dark because of the way the exposure worked itself out. This one went right, so maybe this is 1000 of f4.8. f4.8. Same thing again. Right, that's at 400 ISO. Okay. And it isn't.
The sun was very low in the sky.
The sun was very low in the sky, yeah. No, it's not only just that the sun was low in the sky. Your camera has run out of its options, right? It's your maximum aperture. You have that shot at f8. Okay, that is so you're using shutter priority gave you f8. Maybe f8 is the largest aperture on your camera. No, it's not. It's 2.8. I don't know what happened. As needs for it. And anyway, you're getting the important aspect of it was to get it to stop. And as the shutter speed gets faster or slower, it gets to the state. There's the blurs. Look at the blurs are coming in at a 50th of a second, right? Okay, and that's very slow. 1/20th of a second. You can hardly see it. You can't see it move. And there, you missed that one altogether. Look, well, it's just up there. Okay. It is, yeah. Sun is very low, yeah. It's challenging. You can go back and listen to what I have said. Go back to and have a look at it on the camera and see if I got it right. Maybe I have it wrong. Maybe I've explained it wrong. Maybe I haven't interpreted correctly. But it is quite interesting. That one looks a little bit brighter, and the ones on the other end a little bit too darker. So it might be within the range the camera has been lost, which is what you would expect. All right, okay, so that's all of those. Okay, now, we are working hard today. We are working hard today. Okay, now I will talk about the downsizing. I was hoping to do it today, but we won't have time for it because we have to do the next little bit of our exercise for the next lot of homework. You know, going to the next bit is also very, very important. You're really getting down to the nitty-gritty and understanding the implications of what is going on. We will do the downsizing on the next live stream. We will do it after we've shown the images for the little competition that we've going, the little challenge that we've going. We'll talk about downsizing. Might be more appropriate to do it at that size for the next sort of images coming in. Various ways of downsizing images. So the next one we are going to talk about is Aperture. Okay, Gary, have you gone out now and got yourself another cup of coffee? Because you're probably worn out at this stage. Okay. The aperture influences the amount of the photo that will appear sharp. This is what we are talking about as in depth of field. You can see I've been introducing you to each one of the different settings on the camera. And it is okay to know what the setting is, but they're all interlinked with other bits and pieces, and they all interconnect with one another, and they're all interchangeable depending upon where you are on your camera. So this is just taking the aperture aspect of it. Coming up is where they all get put together in the triangle of exposure. So this is what an old-fashioned camera used to look like, and you had the aperture written on the outside, and it was 1.4 in this case, 2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16. And in the old-fashioned touchy-feely time, you would go click, 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 click manually, and you would feel it going click, 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 click. And each time it went click, it was called a stop because you moved from one spot to the other. They're still called stops. They are still the same numbers, but the nerds have their hands on it, and it all sits inside in the camera. And sometimes they use numbers that are between these numbers to confuse us even more. All right, but they are the numbers that we all knew and love, and they're the ones that you kind of have to learn, because when you know these ones, they're the significant ones, right? And they're important to know. So they're written down here. 2.8 is when the aperture, which is this little bit here of the camera, is either small or big. Either lets a lot of light come through or a small amount of light come through. When it's 2.8, it lets a lot of light come through. When it's 4, it's less. 5.6 is less. 8 is less. 11 is less. 16 is less. It confuses you. The smaller the number, the bigger the hole. The smaller the number, the more light it will let through. Okay? Other very important point about it, it doubles every time. So, or halves, whichever, if you're going this way, it halves, and this way it doubles. So, going this way, whatever amount of light goes through that one, only half of the amount of light goes through this one. Whatever goes through that, half of that one. Whatever goes through that one, half of that one. Whatever, and then go to here. Whatever goes through that, double will go through that. Double of what that will be, and it'll also go up, in 2 and 3 and 4 times the amount of light as well as you're going up along. And they are all linked together. They are all called stops. Right, so you often hear people say, that needs another stop, or that's 1 1/4 stops under, or 1 1/4 stops over. That's what it is there. And it relates to aperture, in shutter speeds, each one of the numbers that we hopped from that you are using, they're called stops as well. Okay. In ISO, you have kind of the concept of stops as well. And they are, as the numbers double, is exactly the same thing in that case, right? So that's where that is. And they go click, click, click there. On the old-fashioned cameras, you used to have an A, you put it in there, and it was called automatic, right? There's where our focus knob was coming up. And on these dials, it used to show the aperture going that way and the aperture going this way. And then your focusing dial here. And that was absolutely brilliant in the old days, which we don't have that anymore on the cameras. And that was great when we wanted to create depth of field or to create focus. And this was the line that you focused on, and that was where your hyperfocal distance was, which you heard about in the past, and we will be talking about again. But it's much more difficult to know where it is now. The old camera used to be laid out here for you. Okay, and it was nice. But the new world doesn't have it. We have to go around it a different way. So that's what the aperture is about. Small hole, big hole, right? Big hole, the number is f2.8, right? Big hole, a lot of light can pass through it. As it goes to 4, it gets smaller. 5.6 gets smaller again. F8 gets smaller again, and half the amount of light comes through at F11, and half the F11 light comes through will be F16, always half. F22. Now, not all of your cameras have all of these apertures, right? Some only have a maximum F8 to F4, or they don't go to 22 and all the way to 2.8. Sports people who are shooting sports with big, huge, long lenses, it's not the length of the lens that makes the difference. It's the maximum aperture, and they're way down off the Richter scale here in their aperture, because that lets an awful lot more light in, and that really helps to affect things afterwards. So, the words of wisdom: aperture, the bigger the hole, the more the light that can pass through. Right. The next one is the smaller the number, right, the bigger the hole. The smaller the hole, the bigger the number, the more of the image will be in focus. That's just a very vague statement of saying image will be in focus, right? It's that depth of field that will appear in focus, or can be in focus, right? I use the word hole just instead of saying aperture, right? Just to try and make it You try to, in my little head. So, when we go to do this as an exercise, when you go out there, we are talking about exposure control. Now this time we are not using shutter priority. We are using the other one on our camera, the aperture priority. Okay? You select an aperture and the camera will select the shutter speed to match. Right? You can also have control over your ISO. You can set your ISO to auto if you want to, or you can pre-decide what to set it to, or you can change it as you are going through your shoot. See how much more sophisticated you are getting now, all right, because of the way we left it the last time. And remember, your camera only has a certain range that it can work within, right? We are looking for depth of field, right? So the brighter the day you take this photograph on, the more effective your large depth of field will be over a long distance. The duller the day you take the photograph and the duller the lighting conditions you take your photograph under, the closer distances will be in focus. You get less depth of field on a duller day because you've got less light or more of a possibility to be able to do it. Okay, so that's where we're going to exposure compensation, right? Remember, exposure compensation, 0. Which metering mode are you going to go with? Which focusing mode? Focusing mode is very interesting. I would suggest spot focusing because you want to determine what you are actually focusing on. It's the best way of achieving, in this case, to use spot focusing. Or, if you prefer, don't forget the one you didn't do, manual focusing. All right? You can turn off autofocusing on your camera. There's a button that turns it off. You can autofocus on wherever you want to. Turn off the autofocus button and the camera will remain in that position. Another option. All these options were always there. It's just a matter of thinking them through. So let's go out and photograph my chair again. We were doing this is the same exercise that we did a while ago. You can almost use the same type of stuff for it. And I have used spot focusing, aperture priority. Okay, I have used this front spot here to focus on in order for you to see the effect of what I am doing. In reality, a better place for you to focus on it would be the chair, because we're learning about depth of field and what the hyperfocal distance is. And it's the hyperfocal distance is where you focus. And the hyperfocal distance is usually 1/3 of the distance in on the photograph that you're taking. So that chair is meant to be 1/3 of the way and 2/3 on this side, right? Well, you have to imagine things, right? And that is the spot that you are working on. Work with a fence or something where you can see if something's in focus in the foreground and the background. And this here in the front is what we are working on to see if that's going to be in focus or not. Or is the back going to be in focus? Or is this bit here is going to be in focus? I use this one because it shows it more dramatically on this camera, because this camera doesn't have a big range of apertures. If you've got a camera that has a range of apertures from 1.8 to f22, you really see the effect out here. All right, and try and have this really something really close to you and something really far away from you. That's the whole idea, that you can see the difference in it, right? So that's where I have it focused on. Took the photograph. It's now set at f8. F8 is the smallest aperture that's available on this camera. And as you can see, that's in focus, and the background is in focus, even though it's spot focused on this spot. If you're doing a landscape, that's what you want. If you're photographing a person and you want the background out of focus, that's not what you want. Okay? So the next one is 5.6. This is not as in focus. That's f4. That should have gone before. 5.6. The wrong sequence. 4.5. That's the way the camera does it. 3.5. See the way it's really falling out there in the back? Here is still in focus because this is where it's focused on each time. 2.8 is definitely focused here. Okay, and sharp here and out here. So if you're doing a portrait, that's what you want. You want that in focus, background out of focus. And if you go all the way up to the opposite side where we have F8, oh, went too far. Up here is F8. You see it's in focus from back to front. Okay, so that is what we are trying to achieve. Depth of field. The aperture controls the amount of light that comes in through the lens. That's doing your exposure. So your exposure, in this case, you can use anything that you want to. You're only making it more difficult on yourself if you use spot metering. All right, use center weighted or the multi or whatever is fine for this. We can also use it to control the amount of the photograph that appears to be sharp and in focus. That's what it is. By varying the aperture, you can make the background go blurry, that's what we're talking about, or to remain as sharp as the main subject in the picture. We were talking about, generally called depth of field. The point that you focus on is called the hyperfocal distance. It is usually 1/3 of the distance in. And now I will give you, which you'll be getting later on again, the rule of the hyperfocal distance. And it says that anything that is 1/3 of the distance in front and 2/3 of the distance behind will be in focus. But it is dependent upon the aperture. Smaller the aperture, the less that distance will be. The smaller the hole f16, f22, the greater it would be. The wide open it is, f2.8 or whatever, the less it will be. And this is a huge advantage if you want to do portraits and get them out of focus. If you want to get blurry legs or whatever, this is the way it's done. And this is where you have to get your heads around. Okay, so was that a hard session today? I think it's getting harder and harder, and I do have pity for you. All right, I do have pity for you, but it's been a hard hour for you. I'm glad you all made it through it. I hope you all have learned. We are getting into really heavy stuff now, and the really, really worthwhile knowing stuff. And don't give up at this stage. It will just suddenly click in your head, as it does with us all, when it just one moment will come and you say, oh yeah, that's because of that, and that's because of that, and that's because of that. There are all these things floating around. And next week we're coming to the challenge. Anybody who has a photograph still to send in, I can accept it just up to about lunchtime, and then I have to close it off. And that's going to be quite interesting as well, to learn all that new technology and get it up and going. It's purely experimental, but it's very interesting as well. We're still looking for all the photographic content to be right, the right shutter speed, the right aperture, right cropping, all those sort of things. People who are using phones and whatever, a lot of this stuff doesn't apply. But should you ever move forward, it's lovely to know about it. It's no weight to carry. It also explains to people that photography is not as simple as what it looks. And these people who make it up into the advanced section and know all these things, that's how they get it, by understanding these concepts that are involved. A couple of other areas for me to go to, like flash and white balance and whatever, and we will be going to them later on. But we're now heading towards the challenge, and we're heading towards the ultimate of the triangle of exposure, which incorporates the depth of field, stopping action, and all those really wonderful things worth learning that aren't all that difficult to do. So take care. Thank you all very much for your time and patience. Go out and enjoy that wonderful sun. Looking forward to seeing you in the little subgroups on Skype in the next tomorrow and Friday, and to the live stream on Thursday, where the challenge will be coming up, and a couple of other little bits and pieces I want to go with as well. So take care, slán, and have a wonderful day. Bye.